Great. Love the cameras. I'm noticing a plateau of people coming, maybe more are coming in, but we'll go ahead and get started with today's echo session. I hope everyone had a nice holiday break and Happy New Year. My name is Evan. If we haven't met before, and I'm on the School Echo team. Today, we're really excited to have Dr. Caitlin Costello here with us, who's going to share her vast expertise on how to protect youth online. Dr. Costello is an associate clinical professor in the Department of Psychiatry, Behavioral Sciences here at UCSF in the Division of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. She is the training director of the Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Fellowship Program and the medical director of Child and Adolescent Outpatient Services. She completed medical school and general psychiatry residency at Johns Hopkins University, fellowship in child and adolescent psychiatry at Columbia and Cornell Universities, and fellowship in forensic psychiatry here at UCSF. Her interests include medical education, curriculum development, obsessive compulsive and tic disorders, the interface between psychiatry and the legal system, and juvenile justice. We're really glad to have Dr. Costello here today. Before we jump into the lovely content, we'd love to start with a mindfulness exercise. I'm going to pass it to Dr. Lindsay Brewitt to lead us through that.
Thank you, Evan. Nice to see everyone and Happy New Year. So because it is the new year, I wanted to do a gratitude mindfulness today. So if you are in a place where you can write and you have a pen and scratch paper nearby, that's great. If not, no problem. You can do this in your head. So give folks a moment to get materials or to just sit back in their chair and prepare to think for a moment. So I'm going to time us for about maybe 45 seconds or so, and I'd like folks to just list as many things in their mind as they can that they're grateful for. And being kind of detailed is great. So thinking about like, I'm grateful for my dog, and to take it to the next level, I'm grateful that my dog is so snuggly in the evening when I watch TV with her. So just take a little bit of time and you can think or write about the things you're grateful for. Folks can bring their attention back. Thanks for engaging in that with us today. So before we turn it over to Dr. Costello, we have just a couple of announcements. Dr. Costello, do you mind advancing to that first announcement slide there? So just a couple of plugs. Can you go back one, Caitlin? Thank you. So as a reminder, for folks who are healthcare providers, we have free consultation available through CalMap, and that's available during business hours. You can call us or you can scan that QR code there, and we'd love to talk with you. And then you could go to the next slide. And a reminder just about upcoming CE and CME opportunities. So this is the School Echo series. You're here for that one, the third one down that you see under the School Echo, but we have all sorts of different free training opportunities that provide free continuing education credits as well. So we welcome you to check those out. Next slide, please. And this is information about our funders. We're grateful to them. Next slide, please. And back to you, Dr. Costello. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited to hear your talk.
All right, thank you. And thank you for the introduction. Today, we are going to talk about some of the risks associated with social media use in youth, both in the clinical and legal areas. We'll talk a little bit about the legal background and status of minors interacting online, and we'll focus mostly on how we can assess and advise patients and families around online risk. I'd like to acknowledge right off the bat that youth social media use is an enormous topic, and no one's expecting you to come away from today's talk feeling totally confident that you are prepared to tackle all of the issues that the youth you interact with on a daily basis are going to face online. And we, we just aim to give you some ideas to move forward with. I'm always happy to continue the conversation. We'll also talk about some resources that can give you more information. And this is, of course, going to be an ongoing project for all of us. That said, getting into it, today's adolescents are very focused in their online lives. Almost all teens say that they have access to smartphones at home. The data I'm talking about today are from a very recent survey from the Pew Research Center. The survey was done in October 2024. The very large majority of teens say that they have a smartphone. 95% of US teens surveyed did. They really like social media a lot. That's not going to come as a surprise to any of us. YouTube was at the top of the list. And next up was TikTok. Now we'll see, what happens with the fate of TikTok and how all of that shakes out. One thing to point out here as a kind of an aside is when you look at research on social media use, you should make sure you're looking at how the researchers classified the social media apps or platforms, because sometimes YouTube and or TikTok are not classified as social media apps. The Pew folks do classify them as social media. Sometimes researchers will not call them social media. They'll classify them in another category, like online videos, and social media will be only the things that are based on two-way interaction. And then Instagram will come to the top of the list. And so all of a sudden, something else is number one. But when you look at it this way, YouTube is number one. And suddenly 95% of kids are on YouTube every single day. Almost half of teens say they are online almost constantly. And this is up from 1/4 of teens a decade ago. Now, if you interact with teens on a daily basis, nearly half might seem like quite an underestimation to you of those who say they're online almost constantly. These were self-report figures. This was what the teens themselves said. Still, almost half say that they're online almost constantly. We are focusing on risks of social media use today, and that's not to say that there are no benefits. It's just that today's talk is about risks. So I do want to acknowledge that many teens say that they get lots of benefit out of social media. And this includes socialization, the ability to form communities that they may not otherwise have access to. And this can be particularly important to teens who may have trouble finding like-minded peers otherwise, either because of geographical isolation or social isolation, or because they belong to minoritized groups, or because they have interests where there aren't a lot of other teens who share similar interests near them. And without the ability to form connections online, they might not be able to form those connections otherwise. And those online friendships are really, really important to them. Education and digital learning, access to information. You can learn how to do anything on YouTube now. I like to say if you can't learn it on YouTube, you probably don't need to learn how to do it. And that includes practicing medicine. I'm kidding, but only a little. Independence. And this is, again, really important for teens who have problematic family structures or are suffering abuse or neglect and can't depend on the adults in their lives to teach them how to do things or to provide things for them that they can now learn or find online. Access to crisis services. There are lots of important things that teens are getting from online connection and social media. That said, we are talking about risks of social media use today. Lots of people ask us, is social media use bad for teen mental health? And it turns out when you ask the question that way, the answer is kind of complicated. So if you just try to say yes or no, is social media use bad for teen mental health? It's kind of complicated because social media use means lots of different things, and teens come to it with lots of different kinds of predispositions and lots of different baseline mental health states. And they use social media in lots of different ways at lots of different amounts and look at lots of different things and do lots of different stuff online. And so if you're doing a study that's trying to find, does social media use make teen mental health overall better or worse, you're likely to find mixed results. And that's what large studies like that, trying to answer that one single question with a yes or no, have mostly found. So the largest studies like this have been a 2019 study that looked at 3 large data sets with a total of 355,000 people. If you're not familiar with how studies like this are, that's quite a large study. They found that an association between digital technology use and adolescent well-being, which doesn't mean mental health disorders, but just overall adolescent well-being. The association was negative but small. And then a 2020 study, which was a review of meta-analyses. So this is a review of studies that themselves were already reviewing other studies, as well as reviewing large-scale surveys and longitudinal studies, found a mix of associations, mostly small, and it was unable to distinguish cause from effect. And so what that means is they didn't find a clear yes or no answer. And to the extent they found any answers or any associations, they were small and they couldn't distinguish cause from effect. So, you know, it might be that the teens who used social media to a greater extent had negative impacts on mood, but also you don't know from that whether the social media use caused mood to get worse or whether teens who had lower mood were more likely to use more social media. What gets more interesting, or maybe to put it better, yields more useful results, is to look at more specific questions, because teens aren't one large group and they don't all use social media the same way. When researchers have done that, they've gotten somewhat clearer answers. And then it turns out that there might be windows of vulnerabilities. So teens at certain ages might be more vulnerable to negative effects on their mental health by social media use. For example, a longitudinal study of 17,000 participants ages 10 to 21 found that higher social media use predicted a decrease in life satisfaction 1 year later in girls ages 11 to 13, as well as age 19. And then in boys ages 14 to 15, as well as age 19. So that suggested there might be a window of vulnerability right at the beginning of adolescence in girls and more towards mid-adolescence in boys. The pattern of engagement in social media use might be another thing that's important. Another study looked at 500 adolescents over a course of 10 years and found that in girls, but not boys, social media use in early adolescence, as well as an increase in social media use over time, predicted suicidality in young adulthood. And then the type of engagement also seems to make a difference. Here, a meta-analysis of studies that were done during the COVID-19 pandemic found that most studies showed an association between social media use and ill-being being the opposite of well-being. But they found that the type of social media use was important. So not all kinds of social media use were associated with ill-being. And in fact, some kinds of social media use actually helped to mitigate feelings of loneliness and stress. So the kind of social media use that was helpful was the kind that involved one-to-one communication, self-disclosure in mutual online friendship, positive and funny experiences. The kind that was detrimental was social comparison, fear of missing out, and exposure to negative content. So the answer to the question is social media use bad for teen mental health is it's complicated, but it's concerning. It's concerning enough that the US Surgeon General issued an advisory on social media and youth mental health. And you can read the whole thing, and basically they say it's complicated, but it's concerning. And they do list, they have a pretty good reference list in there that sums up the research pretty well. So what are the mental health risks? Well, they depend on the teen, and they depend on the type of social media use. And they include depression, anxiety, decreased well-being. They include the results of social comparison. And social comparison is really heightened in image-based social media, where teens are looking at heavily curated images of their friends' lives without the ability that adults have to the same degree to contextualize how curated those images are. I think most of us as adults have probably had the experience of looking at social media photos of our friends' glamorous vacations and feeling like our lives are a little bit pathetic in comparison. And, we know fully well that that's not what they do every day of the year. And the teens we work with, don't have the same life experience to be able to put that into context that we do. Exposure to negative mental health content, and even potentially social contagion of negative mental health symptoms. And social media companies have had in some very public instances of coming under fire for their algorithms specifically feeding negative mental health content to teens. And because the algorithm then continues to preferentially feed more of what someone views to that person, the teen who is viewing negative mental health content will then continue to see more and more negative mental health content. Cyberbullying, sexting, exposure to substance use, and social media addiction, and the literature on social media addiction as an addictive behavior, similar to other addictive behaviors, is an evolving. The legal risks of social media activity overlap with the clinical risks, and they include legal consequences from cyberbullying, sexting, exposure to online solicitation and predation, cyberstalking, and cyber harassment. And then a whole group of risks that may or may not involve legal consequences that come from what I would call reputation damage, which is essentially posts being viewed by unintended audiences or viewed in ways that were unintended by the poster, which can include anything from review by admissions officers and employers all the way up to criminal consequences for things that the poster wouldn't have thought would be criminal activity. A couple of examples to illustrate. A few years ago, the Wall Street Journal posted some leaked internal documents from Facebook showing that Facebook was well aware that its content was preferentially harmful to teen girls. These were internal slides from Facebook that were leaked that said we make body image worse for 1 in 3 teen girls. Teens blame Instagram for increases in the rate of anxiety and depression. This reaction was unprompted and consistent across all groups. The internal researchers concluded issues were partly specific to Instagram, especially social comparison. This was Instagram themselves saying this. And specific to Instagram meant Instagram above and beyond other social media platforms. And the reasoning there was Instagram is especially image focused compared to other social media platforms. Instagram was criticized for specifically delivering eating disorder content to teen girls. Self-harm content is very readily available on these platforms. So what do we do about any of this? It's a scary world out there for our teens interacting online. Can the law help us? Maybe. Can we limit social media use for teens by the law? Well, right now, the law protects children under the age of 13 to a degree, sort of, but not really. There's a federal law, the Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act, that requires parental permission for websites or online service providers to collect personal information for children under the age of 13. So you might notice when you go to sign up for a social media site that you have to enter a birth date, and you have to be 13 generally to sign up. And that's why, but you don't really even do anything to verify that. And in surveys, something like 40% of 8 to 12-year-olds acknowledge having social media, and those are self-reported again, so it's probably more. So that's not even very effective. And of course, it does nothing to protect the teens that we're the most worried about. And so legislative attempts to limit social media use for 13 to 17-year-olds have been tried and have been met with a lot of resistance. I mean, there's very heavy lobbying by the social media companies, as one might expect. And the laws have had a hard time getting through. And then to the extent that they've been able to pass, that teens are really good at circumventing limitations on their social media use, because they're so heavily invested in their online lives already. So I have little confidence that that a ban, that an age-specific ban is going to do much. There's an interesting California law in the works about like feeding or like blocking notifications overnight and during school hours to teens. Although the enforceability is unclear. I think because teens are so savvy in getting around it. I think the one thing that may be different now is that as opposed to a few years ago, our phones probably know how old we all are. And it's going to be harder to enter a fake birth date that makes you 13 or when you're not, or 18 when you're not. So TBD, I think, on legislative attempts to limit social media use. But I don't think we can count on the legislation to do this for us. Teens are so heavily invested that if there's a way around it, they'll do it. Recognizing adolescents' impulsivity and poor consideration of risks is important, and some laws have done that, which seems logical and seems to me to be more productive. For example, a California law, sometimes called the eraser button law, that went into effect in 2015, requires all online sites to allow any youth in California. And because they're not really going to like code the site differently for people who live in California versus everywhere else, this now is just part of the design of all of these social media sites, but requires the site to allow anyone under the age of 18 to be able to delete their posts, which is helpful. That of course doesn't, reverse any damage that has already been done by an ill-considered post, but is a step towards recognizing that someone may have posted something that they could later regret. But that's still going to leave a lot of kids out there with the ability to post and the legal ability to post, and parents, teachers, and clinicians in a position to have to help them clean up the damage for it. Interestingly, more teens than you might think support parental consent being required for teens to post on social media. It's a minority of teens, but it's a substantial minority of teens who would support it. There's some recognition here that teens don't make the best decisions there. And this is a starting point for conversations with them that they actually can get themselves into trouble posting online. So what can any of us do? Well, starting at home, parents can monitor their teenagers' online activities. I think a lot of parents recognize that they're not going to be able to know everything their teen does online. And sometimes that translates into thinking they can't know anything their teen does online. There's a lot of space in between there, though. And engaging teens in which apps they use, what the online conversation is in their peer group, is really important, even if they don't know all of the ins and outs. If nothing else, so that they're familiar with the specific risks posed by the specific apps their teen uses, so that they know what to watch out for. Because each app works differently and each app can get them into different kinds of trouble. So even if they don't know all of what their teen is posting, they should know the kinds of trouble to watch out for. Engaging them in discussion of posting habits and decisions is important. The research in teen decision-making behavior actually does show that if a teen slows down to think they make better decisions. So teen impulsivity isn't a black and white. They're always impulsive and making bad decisions. If you can get them to slow down and think they can make better decisions, it's just that they often don't slow down to think. But engaging them in a discussion of posting habits and decisions can be helpful and can result in better decisions. Consultation with adults is one of the factors that has been shown to lead to more mature decision making. Parents do face potential legal liability for children's online behavior. There have been lawsuits that have resulted in legal consequences for parents for what their kids have posted online. Parents, should be aware of that there are stakes there for them as well. The American Academy of Pediatrics has some good resources online for family media plans. Parents can take part in this as well and be a role model. The role of educators. So there are lots of, the school might already have something in place that's being used school-wide. If not, there are lots of online digital citizenship or digital literacy curricula. The Common Sense Education, Common Sense Media has one that looks pretty solid. It's never too early to start. And also just having the conversation in the classroom and whenever it comes up, even if it's not part of a formal digital citizenship curriculum, I think is important because, again, if you can get kids to slow down and think and talk about it, they do make better decisions that way. And then, educators, clinicians, doctors, we all get to make our own choices about our personal lives, but kids do look to us as role models, and we can be role models of appropriate digital habits ourselves, and kids are paying attention to what we do too. Cyberbullying, just a couple of points there. Help students learn to recognize it, encourage bystanders to speak up, encourage students to report it, whether it happens to them or to someone else. California has pretty good laws that cover cyberbullying. It's covered under the cyber harassment laws that provide pretty good coverage for cyberbullying, and allows cyberbullying that happens off campus to be prosecuted. There are some good online resources at stopbullying.gov and connectsafely.org, which has educator guides for cyberbullying, for social media, for digital literacy as well. And on the clinician side, we are doing many of the same things, assessing what adolescents are doing online, what kind of trouble they're getting into, and how we can guide them towards good decision making and help with damage control when they don't make good decisions. And we are at 3:05, so I'm going to wrap up there. Thank you.